Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero. Our guest today is Floyd Landis. He was a professional road racing cyclist who was recruited by Lance Armstrong to ride with the U.S. Postal Team as Chief Domestique, which he did from 2002 to 2004. He left there to lead his own team and finished ninth in the Tour de France in 2005. And then he was the overall winner in 2006, battling a hip ailment in one of the most remarkable comebacks in the history of the storied race, really in the history of sports. Pete recounts it in our conversation, so listen up when he does that. Floyd Landis stunned everyone, but it's a title that was stripped of him, and his doping case eventually led to the attention that Lance Armstrong received, and we've all heard that story. But you probably haven't heard it quite like Floyd tells it, so we think you'll get something special from this episode. Now, I want to take a second, since it's the end of the year, to invite you to support our favorite cause, Save the Brave. You can read about them at savethebrave.org. They are a certified 501c3 nonprofit organization that will fit right into your year-end giving plan, and they're dedicated to helping veterans cope with post-traumatic stress. You can read all about them, donate a few bucks, and help them to help some veterans who can use a hand. Now, Pete and I both support Save the Brave with our time, with our recurring contributions, right out of our PayPal accounts. It's really easy to do. And Scott Husing supports them too. He also serves on their board. They do great work, and our communities benefit firsthand from their results, so we urge you to support them too. And if you would buy a combat veteran a lunch once a month, well, that's all we're asking. The equivalent of that, you can set up a recurring PayPal contribution right at savethebrave.org. You should do it. And while we're at it, we also appreciate your support of the Break It Down show by rating and reviewing the show, buying yourself and your friends a t-shirt or a hoodie, and dropping us a line to let us know what you're thinking and what makes you listen in. Seeing your comments and shares helps new listeners find us, and we really appreciate you doing it. So let's keep it going. Here's our guest today, Floyd Landis.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Floyd Landis. You're listening to the Break It Down show.
Hey, Floyd Landis was a cyclist, and if you don't already know his name, he was on the Postal Service team that made cycling much more famous in the United States than it had been in years prior. The reason we want to talk to you, Floyd, and the reason we're so excited to have you on the show is, you know, when we have sports figures on the show, of course, we want to talk about their achievements and all of that stuff, but we want to give their achievements the backstory of the struggle that really happened in not only the sport, but navigating life and the sport. And so for our listeners today, we have probably the granddaddy of that story, because you were in a sport. The sport of cycling is, you know, internationally renowned. You were a celebrity throughout the world, and perhaps, I think, underappreciated terribly in the U.S., but for a guy who's an American cyclist, you know that better than everybody. And then for your story as it unfolds to date, and you've been retired for several years now, but as it unfolds to date, yours is the redemption story of all redemption stories, and we don't know that it's even reached its peak yet. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the acknowledgement on the backstory. I sometimes I struggle with.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from the Break It Down show, checking in real quick to ask you this. John, Scott, and I all support Save the Brave with our time, our location, our effort, and our money. Each month we give a small amount. Do the same with us. Go to savethebrave.org, click on the donate tab, pick an amount that you want to come out each month, and they will handle all the rest. I stand behind these folks. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the show.
Sometimes I struggle with, I don't know, where other people see professional athletes in their, kind of view of the world. It's easy when you're a professional athlete to just feel like, you're in this little bubble and everyone's just sort of watching and admiring and knowing where they place that and how much value they place on that is hard hard to distinguish. I mean, it was easier for me because, and I shouldn't say easier, but it was more enlightening for me having been around Armstrong. And then, you brought up the Postal Service team and his story with cancer and everything. That brought a whole new level of emotion to the way fans saw the whole thing. And rather than go on, a long tangent about that, I think we lived in our little bubble and we had our sort of rules that we all, played by within the sport itself. And we sort of lost track of how much other people had emotionally at stake in that. At least I did. I don't know if the other guys did. And yeah, it's, the story had some dark periods in it because of what happened and getting exposed for having used drugs during the Tour de France and the lead up to it. It took me quite a few years to try to accept my new place and how people viewed me or even understand how they viewed me for that matter. But I can't say none of it was undeserved and it was a long learning process. But I guess the point I was trying to make initially was that generally speaking, the guys that have some unique, disposition or talent to some sport that would allow them to be at the top level and the professional side of it, they don't really ever experience what other people experience as real life as a teenager and as a young adult, because they get put straight into this other sort of bizarro world where, you're held on a pedestal on one hand and you're held to a set of, I don't mean to take this as an excuse, but it's a slightly set of different standards than the rest of the world holds themselves or anyone else to, for that matter. But yeah, here I am now. I mean, all grown up and, a little bit worse for the wear, same as everyone else that went through it, particularly Lance. I mean, the higher profile you were in that whole story, the worse it was for you. So I appreciate the ability to actually try to articulate, what it was like. I don't know exactly what value that has for people looking in, but at the end of the day, it was, it wasn't a boring life, put it that way.
We think it's going to have tremendous value. We think that there's a human story in there and lessons that are there that have to do with perseverance and, and reconciliation with the truth and all of that stuff. Your story, though, is unique for a couple of different reasons. I think all the things that you described were amplified by the fact that you were thrust into that world, I think, a little less prepared than, let's say, if you grew up French and you had been a little more ushered into the celebrity of the sport and all of that stuff. I mean, you grew up in Pennsylvania, and then to be on the world stage the way that you were, and, feel free to correct me, but it seems to me that you're in a circumstance where that was thrust upon you a little more amplified than it would have been in some other circumstances if you had been, on a French team or a team that valued cycling a little more and had more of a minor league system, for lack of a better thing to call it. But it seems to me that you are still in a place where, and like I said, Pete and I bring you on the show because we feel like there is a value that maybe we don't even know what it is yet. But it's definitely a story that deserves to be told so that we can learn the lessons of redemption that seem to still be happening and not be finished in your life. Where are you physically? Where are we talking to you at today?
At the moment, I'm in New York. I live in my residence is in Colorado. I've been spending a bit of time in Pennsylvania recently. We have in the second part of the story here, we have a company that sells hemp-derived products, CBD products, and we also sell marijuana products in a couple dispensaries in Oregon and Colorado. But for the first time this year, the Department of Agriculture has allowed us to grow hemp in other states that hadn't specifically addressed the law previous. So, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and we have I grew up as a Mennonite, and it's a fairly close community there with the Amish and Mennonite farmers. And so we partnered with 50 different Amish farmers to grow some hemp for us. So I've been spending a lot of time there working on just the harvest of everything and processing it. But yeah, so I've been traveling around a bit, but typically my residence is Colorado.
Okay. And well, great. I'm glad to hear about that business. We have another friend who's in that business, and we support, the legalization and the help that especially athletes who have retired get from CBD products. And is that part of your physical? I don't know to call it rehab or what is it? Because people
Might
don't
as well
really
be
know
called
about the endurance of cycling here in the States.
Yeah, look, especially endurance sports, but any sport like that becomes kind of an addiction in itself at that level because that's all you do, and it's a tremendous thrill or adrenaline rush, or for lack of a better word, to be part of events of that magnitude. And so it's hard to ever. I mean, even my exit from the sport was a little more dramatic and probably a little harder than had it been, what I had hoped for. But for just about anybody, regardless of what happens or however their career ends, no matter how well it goes, it's a difficult transition. And I think people talk about it from time to time, but I don't think most people want to complain about it because most people view anybody that's had the privilege of being a professional athlete for any amount of time as having been lucky. So nobody wants to hear them complain, but just from a human point of view, it's a difficult transition. And so, everybody that is in any kind of sport where you get injured a lot has aches and pains. They're probably a little worse than they would be anyway. Although at this point, I just turned 44, things ache, and I guess they would anyhow. But what got me interested in marijuana in the first place was I had my hip replaced in 2006, and was as you would expect, was prescribed lots of narcotics, and it probably wouldn't have been an issue. Those do have real medical value for people that have surgeries and things like that. But if you're also going through some other kind of life crisis, it makes it easy to just become dependent on those things, and that's what happened to me. And so I got I was one of the lucky ones and still here, but it's a huge cultural problem, obviously.
Let me ask you about the hip thing too, because your hip was replaced in 2006. That's coincidentally the same year you won the Tour de France. So,
yeah.
Would you tell your younger self to do that? I mean, look, this is your one shot, right? You're there, your hip is about to give out, but you're in the best shape of your life. Would you tell yourself now at 44 or even at 64 years old, you'd be like, you know what? Not worth it.
Man, I don't know. I go back and forth on that. And it gets interpreted as, would you have done everything that it took to go win the tour? And I've heard Lance say a few times that he would, and he gets all kinds of, ridicule for it. But I know what he means. It's not. I think part of the issue, part of the I guess the point I was trying to make when I started talking earlier about just the past and how athletes are, how they perceive themselves and how other people perceive them. It feels, and again, this is gonna, at the risk of sounding like this is me complaining, because I'm not. I have a great life now, and I'm happy that I've been through a lot of different things, and I feel like I'm a more understanding person when I read crazy stories of other things other people do and wonder why they would have done it. Mm. But at the risk of sounding like it's an excuse, that when you're in the middle of it and I mean, this isn't just making assumptions. You know quite literally that the competition is going to be using performance enhancing drugs, and that's what you're going to have to do if you want to win. Then you do it, and you look for ways to justify it. That if you're on the other side of it, it may not might make as much sense, or maybe most people haven't actually been haven't been asked to think it through. I mean, here we are, we're young adults, but practically just kids. We're riding bicycles around, right? We're not solving the world's problems. And people that admire you as an athlete, whether they assume you're doing that or not, particularly the ones that are assuming you're not, they have kind of a double standard towards athletes that they don't have elsewhere, right? I mean, everybody knows that the best rock and roll musicians use drugs, and they use drugs because it helps them write songs and write music. And those drugs are illegal, but no one cares. There's no one saying that you shouldn't be doing that. In fact, people allow their kids to look up to these guys and I'm not making a judgment as to whether they should or not, but it's a double standard, right? So here we are, we're doing what we're trying to do, and they're doing what they're trying to do. And you could say, well, that's art and it's not competition, but everybody knows that this country is capitalist and it's about competition. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
So whether I would do it all again, given what I went through, and particularly given what people around me went through, not so much me. I mean, I can handle it, I guess. I made it through, but there was a lot of other people, just, family and the fans of the sport that took it really personally and didn't view it, the way I just articulated, and still don't, some of them. And that's fine. I understand their point of view as well. But I think for that reason, I'd say I probably wouldn't do it. It's not this isn't being defensive here, but it's not really a fair hypothetical anyway. But put it that way, if it was just me that took the fall for it, and what was still able to live that kind of, exciting life for those years, I think I'd do it again. But given the way it affected other people or their perception of it all, I think that probably outweighs the personal benefit to me.
So taking, and it's kind of hard to remove, taking all of the performance enhancing stuff out and just looking at the hip, and I have a follow-up after this, just that part. Like when you look at yourself now and you see the road, and you've got a replaced hip, and those things only last so long. At some point, something has to be done with the replacement because it's not likely to outlive you,
Yeah. So my dilemma was I had broken it in 2002 on a bike ride, and hips typically, if they're broken in such a way that it's not displaced, they'll heal. And generally you'll have, years down the line, you'll have arthritis issues with those hips. But if they're displaced badly, then they have a much less chance of healing in such a way that all of the, capillaries aren't obstructed, and the bone is getting nutrients to the ball of the hip joint.
Yeah.
And so the medical, diagnosis is called avascular necrosis. It means that when it heals, the fractured site heals, and it actually is reattached. And now your bone is fine for all practical purposes, except that scar tissue where it heals is more dense than the bone itself. And there's very little blood flow through to the ball of the hip to begin with. And so over time, the hip dies, and that's a direct result of the fracture, but it happens years later. It happens over time. So by 2006, mine was broken pretty badly, and by 2006, it looked like it needed to be replaced. And I had great surgeons. They said, look, Floyd, you probably should stop racing your bike and find something else to do and preserve this natural hip as long as you can, because you're obviously you're speeding up the arthritis problem and the degradation problem. But for me, it felt like, I might have bought myself a couple years where maybe I didn't have to have it replaced till 2008 or 10 or something. But the trade-off was, quit racing at the peak of my career, and the one chance I'd probably have to win the Tour. And so, I think with that in mind, I'd probably do that again. It'd be one thing to say, look, if you'd never have to have your hip replaced, but if you want to sacrifice your hip, you should, you can race another year. That would be a more difficult decision. I don't know that I would say yes to that. But given that I knew it was already destroyed, the trade-off wasn't so great. Difficult
when I was watching you race, the day, and if I've got the timeline wrong, because I'm going on memory here, correct me, but the day before you would, what they call bonked, you'd run out of energy and you didn't place very well. But then the next day, you just went bonkers. And like the announcers were losing their minds. They're like, no way, too early, too fast, too much. You just kept going. When you look at all the rides you've had that day, when you just took on the entire field and smashed the hell out of them, is that the ride of your life? Or is there another ride where you're like, that's nothing. I went on a 10-mile ride with my wife and I wouldn't trade that. So what is that the ride?
No, that one for sure. Partly because it just ended up defining the whole story and what I lived through after that. But it was, everything went right that day, just like everything went wrong the day before. It's, I was proud of that. It's in bicycle racing, you don't often have at least in a given stage, you don't often have, an hour or at least 45 minutes of that ride where you're going to win.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, crashing or doing something stupid, you're going to win. Generally, bike racing, you don't know until the very last, few hundred yards if you're going to win at all. So for that reason, it was one of the more, I don't know, I guess exciting and memorable rides. I've had other rides where I felt as strong or I felt as good, but that one, because I could actually enjoy it while it was happening, was unique.
So it seems to me that you have sort of a feeling of a healthy amount of contrition along with standing your ground and saying, hey, I'm saying this on my own terms. I mean, for our listeners, I want them to know that in this process that you've gone through with the exposure of of the drugs that you guys took and all of that stuff, you're like, you paid the price with your suspension first before you decided to open your mouth and really say, hey, listen, this whole system is jacked. And to me, that was terrible and tough to do. And we could see that. But now that you're sort of on the other end of it, and I keep struggling to say that because I don't know if you're on the other end of it yet. Seems like you are. And to a lot of us, you are. What I'd like to know is, going through that process, you mentioned that you don't know that you're going to win a bicycle race till the last bit of it. Are you winning this race, in your life and with what you've been through? And
yeah.
do you know that yet?
I think at this point, when you're a kid and you're competitive like that, and that's your personality, then yeah, you're trying to win whatever you're doing. I'm going to win this or I'll win that, or, things need to be worthy of boasting afterwards. I think hopefully I'm past that point in my life, but it's interesting that you say that, kind of the way you explained it, where I served the suspension first, and I struggled during that time as well. Part of me, look, it again, it's hard to put into context where people can really feel it because they weren't there. But these guys that I raced with, I mean, to at least some extent, we were all doing the same thing to prepare, whether it was training or drugs or who knows what, or just staying focused and not, going out and partying. And those guys, I felt like were my, that was my crew. Whether I'm racing against them or they're on my team, this is the environment I'm in, and I don't have any animosity toward these guys for what they're doing because I'm doing it too, and vice versa. So when the whole thing came out, I mean, I knew in my mind, that the best thing to do for my own life would have just been to admit it, but that would have meant, destroying a bunch of other people's lives at the same time. And it took me a long time to kind of come to grips with that. I didn't really have a choice on that. And to this day, I know a lot of them still resent me for it and feel like I should have just taken the fall, but, and maybe I'd feel that way if I were them as well. I feel like I did the best that I could do without, I mean, this country has a weird double standard, right? This country likes mafia movies and they respect the guy the most who doesn't talk in the face of, all of the evidence against him because he's got his guys' backs. Whereas,
but when their family is the victim,
yeah, that's a problem. But it's a weird thing, right? The culture of this country sees you as a rat if you play the game and get caught and then talk.
Yeah.
And I knew there was a risk in that. And I thought, at some point my life had gotten pretty bad, and I was drinking every day, all day, and taking narcotics and just trying to make it all go away and feel numb. And I thought, okay, well, if they're going to call me a rat, then they call me a rat, but I'll tell them the truth, and I'll just tell them everything about it. And if maybe they're right. Maybe the anti-doping agencies are right, and they can figure out a way to fix this. I never really believed that they did. I'd never seen any kind of evidence that they actually even wanted to really fix the problem. And this is going another direction with the conversation, but at this point, nothing, just so you understand, nothing has really changed in professional sports. I mean,
right.
The anti-doping agencies are nothing more than a PR arm of the Olympic Committee trying to make it look like they actually care about fairness. And, I guess I don't want it to come out sounding like I'm bitter about the whole thing. But that is one thing that I still have some animosity about, is the fact that the Olympic Committee themselves, which I think is generally accepted as probably the largest, most corrupt organization on earth, could even have the nerve to point at one of us who were just racing our bikes around and say that we're cheating.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I was defiant against them because, fuck them. That's not how I see the world. I'll get these guys' backs and I'll take the fall.
Right.
On the other hand, it destroyed everything around me, and lying's no fun anyway. And it was a real dilemma. And I think that, a lot of people look at it and they'd say, this is what I would have done, or this is what you should have done. And it's easy to say that. And someone were probably right, but it just took me a while to get my head around all of it and do the right thing, I guess.
Well, for our listeners, I want to say, I don't know if that's what I would have done. And I don't know, because thank God I've never been in a position to have to navigate a situation that big and that heavy. And how you did it is how you did it. And the only thing that there's no second guessing you. Not a question. I just want
to make a kind of a dark joke. The drugs helped get me through that part of it too.
Wow. That's not the easiest thing to admit or I don't know, man. I think one of the things that made Pete and me both admire your story as it's unfolded so far is the candor with which you've approached all this stuff. And, that's not an easy thing to do. It's not easy to be on that pedestal and have a personal situation be, exposed that way. And you just came with it and paid.
Well, I had to just mitigate that a little. I did have a lot of time to sit and think, and, other people, this is, it's an interesting story in their life to watch it go by, but they're not forced to sit and all alone and think for years at a time about which way is best and which isn't. Not that I came to any conclusions, but yeah, it was, I guess, deserved, and it was also a little unfair. That's how I feel about it now. But yeah, I'm still here.
Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, there was a time where I figured that, I don't know. I really did get to a dark place for a couple of years where I didn't want to die. I never felt suicidal, and I can see how people could. I guess it's just not part of my personality, but I can certainly feel. I certainly understand people that do commit suicide or want to. I don't know. I always just felt like, well, I guess it'll either get better or it won't, and I'll just kind of get through it whatever way I can. And it's weird because cycling sort of attracts people with not just cycling, but endurance sports. If you look at them, it attracts certain personalities that are obsessive about things too, right? And generally that's associated with more addictive personalities. So it kind of came with the territory. But yeah, no, I'm not surprised. I never wanted it to just end. I guess that's one way out, but I did always have, at least a couple of really good friends around that were always available if I wanted them. But in my mind and for me, the best, as much as it was the darkest point in my life, the best thing for me to do was just be alone and try to think. And at the same trying to stop from thinking.
Well, you had a best friend who committed suicide as well. And so I want to acknowledge your friends who were there for you. Because we talk about this a lot. We have a lot of veterans on the show, and we support PTSD causes and stuff. So we want to acknowledge the folks who are helping their friends just by being.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, those guys, and that makes me, every time I think about it, and I would think about those guys, I think, man, I can sit here and wallow in my self-pity, or I can look around and say, look, there's people that had dealt with far more traumatic things that, and I can sit here and try to tell you what it would be like, and you might be able to envision what a bike race is like, but no amount of stories is going to make you feel what it must be like to be in a war. I don't think there's even words for that. But so, yeah, sometimes it helps to have relativity, but that doesn't really make it better for anyone. And if on that subject, that is one thing that I have kind of paid attention to in the last few years. And I'm glad there's more attention being paid to it for these veterans that are just kind of, or at least for a long time, were kind of tossed aside, and no one really knew that PTSD was even a thing. And everybody just said, and they come from a macho, I shouldn't say macho, that's used in a negative term these days, but like they come from an environment where you don't complain, right? You man up and you deal with it. And yeah,
it sure is that.
They have it way worse than me, I can tell you that.
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
And yeah,
it sure is that.
They have it way worse than me, I can tell you that.
Well, let me ask you this, because it does attract, like you said, a certain personality and a certain amount of drive. Are you in your business life now? Because we've done plenty of looking back. Let's look ahead. In your business life now, are you that driven, or are you in a place where you can downshift and take it easy a little bit?
I'm in a middle gear somewhere. I mean, I feel like, first of all, what we're doing now is as much as we grow, marijuana products and process them and other things, really what we're doing is selling something that helps people. And I'm not a great salesman. I'm not a very good, anyway, this don't mean to insult salespeople, but I'm not a very good liar. If I'm selling something, I believe it, I can sell it. And I'm convinced that this stuff helps people with all kinds of issues. It's not magic, and there are, all kinds of claims being made that are unsubstantiated and probably made up, but it does help people with anxiety, and it does help people that are dealing with, tough times in their life. And I know it for a fact because I've seen it, I've felt it. And so to me, that the idea of competition doesn't really reconcile with that. I'm trying to get people to try something that I think can make their life better without taking it past, the level of giving them information on it and saying, look, this might help. And if it doesn't help, then so be it. It doesn't help everybody, but it's worth trying. And it's not, I'm out there trying to sell it at all costs. And fortunately it is real and it does help people. And so it's not that difficult to sell, but there are still people that have misguided moral aversions to marijuana and all kinds of other things. And so that's one hurdle. But if you get people to listen and try it, it doesn't take a huge competitive spirit to try to sell it.
Hey, let's plug your business.
Yeah. The business I started initially was only marijuana. This was kind of before the hemp CBD thing became widely talked about. 4 or 5 years ago, because I was living in Colorado, I qualified for to apply for one of the initial marijuana licenses. And so I started a company that we took the raw plant material and we processed it into oils and things like that get used in edibles that people use, or vape products. And since then I've moved on to processing hemp, because CBD became a much more widely accepted, and I think to some extent it became a vehicle to help people actually understand marijuana and its medicinal benefits. Because before that, you either you liked marijuana because you were a stoner, or you had convinced everybody that had medicinal properties, but they all thought it had to do with THC. And it turns out there's a lot of other compounds in marijuana that benefit people, and possibly THC is not even the most important one. But so I started that company, and because I had used marijuana to get off of opiates, and it's something I cared about, and it wasn't, I didn't know where it would go, but I liked the subject and also liked being around it. It was good energy in Colorado when it first got legalized. It was something new and everyone involved was excited. It was fun. And so it was actually a real kind of a turning point for me in getting out of the obsession I had with cycling and what had happened and all those feelings that I had about that. So since then, yeah, we've acquired a couple of dispensaries. I have a dispensary in Leadville, Colorado, and then 4 dispensaries in Portland, Oregon. They're called Floyd's Cannabis. And then we have a line of hemp-derived CBD products called Floyds of Leadville. And we sell those and ship to all 50 states. And we sell through bike shops and convenience stores and things like that. And we try to just make it, high quality stuff and ask people to just try it. And, I would say, probably one out of 10 people doesn't really get a benefit from it. But depending on your personality and your levels of anxiety and other things you're dealing with in life, it can be a tremendous benefit for people.
My hips from combat are pretty shot. They're not all the way shot like your hip was, but they're not getting better as I get older. And I've been thinking seriously about, figuring out some kind of CBD based treatment, just because, they're, I don't know, pre-arthritic, arthritic, who knows where they're at, but they sure as hell don't feel good, Floyd.
Are they hurt during the day, or is it a nighttime pain that keeps you awake?
The whole time.
The whole time.
I'm sitting in this chair right now. I've got to constantly activate my hips to make them not hurt,
I'll tell you one thing. I mean, look, CBD is a pain mitigator, and it's also there's things about pain that are directly connected to your mood as well, right? Like when you're in a good mood, the same kind of pain doesn't feel as bad, and when you're down, then you fixate on it. So in some ways, it helps because it helps your anxiety levels, and I don't know how much you have of either or one of those, but I will tell you this: mine was replaced 2006, so 13 years ago, and it's, I mean, like until people bring it up, I forget that it's there. The flexibility is almost as good as the other one, to the point where unless I'm doing something unusual, I would not notice it. And the pain is completely gone. I mean, and it's been 13 years. I think the technology on the hips now is quite good. And yeah, you're young and you might need a second revision at some point, but it's an outpatient surgery, and it's a couple of weeks of, the soft tissue healing from the incision and everything else, but it's miraculous. Like it's as big and physically large as it sounds. I got to replace this huge joint. It's actually one of the things that medicine has gotten so good at, that it's hard to advise somebody to just wait if they're in pain.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, what I'm dealing with is tolerable, and I'm hoping to hold out, but you're right. At some point,
that's what they tell you, right? They say, well, just put up with it as long as you can. Well, like, I can put up with it my whole life if I have to.
Yeah.
There's no way to say what that threshold is, but I tell you what, if it affects your life in any meaningful way, or relationships because you're in pain too much, then it's the time to get rid of it. But it's worth trying some CBD. I don't know if you tried it. I mean, there are different strengths and different doses, and it, depending on the kind of pain, and that's one type of pain that it probably would help with, but if you have a real arthritis pain, bone on bone kind of arthritis, it's going to be hard to manage without some kind of surgery.
Yeah.
Hey, Pete, you know what would help you out is if you go to floydsofleadville.com, you can get soft gels, tinctures.
Yeah. See, like I said, I'm not a very good salesman. I try to get surgery.
Yeah. See, there you go. Also, $5 shipping and free shipping on orders over $50. So help your hips out a little bit. Yeah, man. The technology on a lot of things is changing, and for us to have a product in the American zeitgeist right now, where we can kind of go back to nature, I think is a refreshing change. Not that I'm not for technological advancement in nutrition and health and stuff, because I certainly am, but that's one of the things that, with CBD being mainstream as it is and growing by the day, I think you're able to help a lot of people out. When I asked the question about your drive and what gear you're in, sort of, and you said you were kind of in a middle gear, it's not necessarily the competitiveness, but it's the amount of work. This is what I'm curious about: the amount of work that you get up and do. Are you still in the mode where you get up early and you go hard, like you have trained and lived for so many years, or have you reached a point of normalcy where you're going like, the rest of the world doesn't operate at that level?
No, I'm still there. And I'll tell you why. I mean, partly it's because I like what I'm doing and I care about it. And so that makes it easier and doesn't feel as much like work. But even when it does, I guess this is just this will answer your other question too, whether, I'm out the other side. If I have too much time, I sit and think, and some things don't have answers, right? And so if I sit and think about the past and become unhappy about it, it doesn't serve any purpose for me. So it helps me to have this. And the other thing that helped me in life, and I used to kind of laugh at people. They'd say, they talk about how great their kids are, but I have a little daughter that's 5, and I like that's another thing that helps take my mind off of, which I guess is just simply a selfish thing anyway, just focus on me and things that didn't go right that I wish had gone differently. But between her and working, therapy for me in a sense. I think that's what it feels like, at least if I sit and think about it.
Well, again, I'm sprinkling this with statements as well as questions, but they're all to advance the conversation. I think it was Dave Chappelle who recently was talking about Muhammad Ali and what Muhammad Ali went through with his whole, the Vietnam issues that he went through, and somebody called him the Muhammad Ali of comedy, and taking that compliment, like you had really paid a price for this whole thing that you went to Africa and all that shit. And he said, I appreciate that compliment, but I wouldn't recommend it.
No, man, that guy's great. I'm glad he's back.
Yeah.
Well,
okay. Well, then I'll say it. We're glad you're back too.
No, I appreciate it. I will say though, I wanted to add one thing on the CBD side and the marijuana side. There's still a lot of people in this country that view marijuana as, morally objectionable or believe that it should be illegal. And a lot of that is a result of, the Reagan administration and the war on drugs, which is a lot of propaganda anyway.
Yep.
But on the other hand, there are valid arguments for controlling it and not, letting kids use things that might permanently alter their mind. And there needs to be a way to actually, regulate it and make sure that at least minimize the amount of damage that it can do, because too much of anything can be harmful, right? But the worst part about the whole thing is that, it's created this situation where, the war on drugs in general created this situation where a bunch of poor, underprivileged, mostly black kids are in prison over it. And we still have people feeling like, this stuff should be illegal. But what I would ask people to do is weigh not, and again, this is similar to, the way I view what happened with me is life's not black and white, right? There's some nuances to it. And you also have to weigh what your best possible practical solutions are, not just what sometimes this country gets caught up in this, these righteous wars where we just believe something's right and refuse to just actually look at it objectively and say, what should we do here that's the most rational? And given the alternative, which is to put a bunch of poor kids in prison over it, it's hard for me to understand how somebody that's objective can look at the whole marijuana thing and say we shouldn't come up with a better way than that. So that's kind of my rant for the day. But and again, it's another subset of people that makes me actually feel better about myself when I see what happened to a lot of them. I mean, here they are, many of them in prison for life, looking outside saying this stuff is now legal, and there's a bunch of privileged white people selling it, and here I am, and no one's going to undo it. So, I mean, I guess the world's got a lot of unfair things, and for what it's worth, mine was the least of the problems.
Well, amen on those points. Whether yours was the least of the problems or not, subject of debate. But this is one of the things that we enjoy having sports figures on the show about, is because we can, like I said, we can admire your achievements, but there's a bigger story, and there's a more human story, and there's a more relatable struggle. And I think that you having been through a bunch of dynamics around what happened in your sports career is what's going to stand the test of time in terms of your story. Yeah, I'm teetering on whether to ask you this, and I'm going to ask it. And then if you don't like it, we can cut it out. But I'm just curious about whether you have, or whether it's even worth it, whether you've repaired your relationship with Lance Armstrong, or whether you give a shit, because he seems to have been through some things that created some contrition for him too.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I haven't talked to him I've seen him face to face a few times because of the legal, things we went through.
Yeah.
But I haven't talked to him in probably 10 years. And rightfully so, he was, he blamed me for a lot of the way things went when they took the turn, when I decided to, kind of expose everything. And he did unfairly get, blamed. I don't know that he unfairly got punished necessarily by the rules themselves, but just the response of the fans and everything else and some of this is his own, I should say his own fault, but some of this is a result of him having been the only guy that people recognized anyway.
Yeah.
course, he got more of the blame when he got more of the upside and he got more of the downside. And he blames me for a lot of that. And I understand that. I don't have any animosity towards him now. And I don't know where he stands on that. Look, what made him a great competitor is he's hard-headed and he
Right.
likes to fight. So I suspect he kind of still resents me, and I don't really foresee us, being friends. But I don't have any. I hope he's doing well. The guy paid a very dear price, and if that's not enough for some people, then I think they're misinterpreting his actual place in society from the beginning. Some of them feel like he used the story about his cancer to somehow promote himself, and he did, but that was his story. It's not like it was a sinister thing. It just happened. So I have not spoken to him. I don't know how he feels about me, but if I had to guess, I'd say he probably isn't going to call me anytime soon.
Yeah, I don't expect that he'll pick up the phone necessarily. I don't know. I mean, my own selfish desire as a fan and as a human being. I hope you guys are forced into a room at some point. You have to look each other in the eye, and I hope his attitude about what has happened is as healthy as yours. The things that I've seen about where he is now. I heard a story that he was walking down the street and a bunch of people were sitting outside at a cafe and they started, hey, there's Lance Armstrong, and then somebody piped up and yelled some shit, and
Yeah.
and then he ended up calling the restaurant and like buying the whole balcony their dinner or whatever.
Good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think it points to a healthy thing. But like you said, he paid a dear price.
Yeah, he did.
And I'm not belittling that price because I never had to go through anything of the sort. But
well, I mean,
he had it to pay because of like you said, he experienced the downside and the upside.
Well, when I say he paid a dear price, I mean and this is hard for people. And it's weird, right? And the reason you asked that question, obviously, you had thought it through and realized that he and I'm probably the one person that can see things as closely as he does on Earth, but
yep.
But the real price that he paid is just this public humiliation. This is something that, unless you've been through it, it's very hard to understand how bad it can be and how much it can actually affect the way you even view yourself. And having lived through that on even a smaller scale than he did, it's painful. And you can say he's still got lots of money, and you can make all kinds of arguments that he came out of it okay. But that amount of public humiliation, I don't like. There's nobody on earth that isn't affected by that other than maybe Donald Trump, from what I can tell. And because he doesn't seem to care if people ridicule him, but everyone that has any feelings at all has some level of harm done when the whole world starts pointing fingers at you, and they don't really give you they don't give you a platform to, in the middle of it, at least in the middle of the hysteria, to actually explain yourself, whether they would agree or not. It's not the point, but you don't even really get to argue. You just have to sit and take the abuse on the internet, and it's painful.
Hey, so when is enough? I mean, it's one thing that, okay, you guys deserve some amount of punishment. And I was thinking about Lieutenant Clint Lawrence, who was just pardoned by the president for killing Taliban guys. He went to prison. He made a questionable call, lost his entire military career, went to prison for 6 years. Sure, he's got a pardon, but aren't we in the zone where maybe he's done enough? And he'll have to continue to bear this burden.
Oh, yeah, he's famous for that now. That's who he is. He's become this guy, right?
Yeah.
That's the face of it. I don't know. It's a very bad punishment in my mind. And I kind of was paying attention to the story because you can see on his face that he wants to be defiant, but he also doesn't want to be in the middle of it at all. Like, that's not what he signed up for.
Right.
And, you never know the whole story, and both sides of his story have got all kinds of, crazy claims. But the guy was in a war, and if the president pardons him and he's already been abused to, on the cover of the New York Times for months, I don't know what more you can do to the guy.
Right.
I don't know what the purpose would serve anyway. That's the other thing.
Yeah. I mean, have you and Lance and George and all the other guys, have you guys, in my mind, you've done enough. I mean, everybody was doing this. Heck, there's not even a winner from one of the years, because it's just like, well, we can't keep cutting to 17th place. So,
I mean, that's the most bizarre thing ever, honestly. Like, you could not have a winner at all. Like, it didn't even happen.
Yeah. I mean, have you guys paid? I don't want to put you on the spot, man. Let me just say this. I think you guys have paid enough for that. I mean, you get a chance to redo and start again and move forward, you know?
I hope so. I mean, I feel like I know there's still people out there that, and most of these people are involved in cycling some way or another. And that can be, sometimes it can reduce the size of your view of the world to something unreasonable. But I think most people that aren't hardcore cycling fans that just sort of watched it passively, I don't think anyone would say these guys should be punished anymore. I don't know what else there would be to do. I mean, what more can you take? And the story's so old now that the truth is out there. It's not like there's anything we could do to undo any of it. So I don't know what there's left to.
Well, and let's be honest too. A lot of folks lose sight of the fact that if there was a pill that they could take and they would do their job 15% better and potentially make a lot more money for their family, there'd be motherfuckers in that line taking that pill. Even if it cost them 10 years in the back end of their life, they would take that pill.
They would take it. There's nobody that, if they understand this situation that Lance or I was in, or any of these other guys, and are honest with themselves, there's nobody that would say they wouldn't have done it. That's just the fact of the matter.
Yeah. And again, like if you wanted to find the one guy that wasn't doing it, he's so far back in the pack.
He's not going to make it to the point where they would offer it to him. That guy doesn't have any determination.
What are you doing now?
You know what you're talking about, Pete? You're talking about Adderall.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. People
are talking about bare aspirin.
Yep.
So all the way down through whatever it is, it's just you guys were right at the point where they decided to enforce rules that were written as opposed to the whole stack of unwritten rules that everybody understood.
Yeah.
Yeah. What made it even more complicated on that level, I will say, is that they actually did have written rules, and now that we've got this hypocritical position where we're pointing at Russia and the Russian Olympic Committee for covering things up. I mean, we had an entire generation, Carl Lewis, and the anti-doping agency then was actually part of the U.S. Olympic Committee. And, Don Catlin ran that thing, and they covered up every single positive drug test for many, many, many years, right up until it came to us. And then they just decided we're going to change the rules. And there's no way we could have known that was coming. And for that matter, to some extent, they're guilty of actually perpetuating the fact that it was all available to us. And then when we decided to do it, they said, okay, well, those aren't the rules anymore. I mean, the whole thing is it's bizarre.
Yeah. Yeah. Carl Lewis tested positive, but no one seems to care about that.
Yeah, of course. And he'll still say he didn't, which doesn't make any sense because it's clearly not true. But I mean, I don't know Carl Lewis. And I used him as an example that everyone knows his name, and everyone from that generation accepts that some shenanigans went on, but don't care to even talk about it. But then one day they changed the rules and said, okay, now we're not doing that anymore. Although I will say they did that for a very short period of time, and now we're back to, okay, that didn't work. Let's just let everyone use drugs.
Do whatever you want. Hey, so what's replacing your drive and your passion in terms of like record breaking or world championships? Like, are you going to try to break the records for most quarters on your elbow and then snatching them with one hand? Or
no, I think I'm done trying to break records. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like, when you're young and you're all fired up and you're going to take over the world, that's all great. But at some point, hopefully you outgrow it. I mean, I don't know. I assume I would have anyway, but I think given everything I went through, I'm not trying to win anything. There's a lot of ways to win. And one of them is just figuring out how to be happy in your own skin. And that, for me, that's hard enough.
Well, I think that's the biggest way to win. For our listeners looking for ways to win, I'm going to do this again. Go to floydsofleadville.com. CBD products, soft gels, etc., and enhance your physical performance and feel better and get through life a little easier with things that are legal.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that.
This is sort of a I have to say, because we're in the home stretch, that I'm really elated that that you're as open about these things, and this episode is, I don't want to speak for Pete, but for me, this is what I was hoping that we'd get to talk to you about.
I appreciate it.
Things open.
There was a long time where I felt real anxiety even talking about it, and I don't know exactly why that was. I think it's because I didn't really know if people would understand or cared enough, and I think it was mostly I was concerned that I would say something that would be misconstrued, because when I was in the middle of it, and anyone that's lived through any kind of public humiliation knows that you're best not saying anything. I learned that the hard way. Just don't talk, because whatever you say is going to get used to whatever end they've already predetermined.
Well, let's turn that backwards.
I got past that, I think, and I can talk about it without, feeling like I need some whiskey.
Yeah. Wow. Well, then, just to give the flip side of that, rather than misconstrue something, what is the question that I should ask you?
Oh man, I don't, I don't know. Sometimes when people bring up something that overarching, my first thought is to say, look, maybe this country is a little obsessed with professional sports in the first place, and yeah, I benefited from it tremendously. So I don't mean to take away anyone else's opportunities on that, but it gets held to this standard and to this level that, I mean, if first of all, everyone should just assume that these guys are people, and they were in some sense lucky that they had genetic makeup to do what they're doing. They also worked hard. There's not to take that away, but they without that luck wouldn't be there. And they're still just people. And so they're probably going to disappoint you if you make them into your hero one way or the other.
Yeah.
I guess that's it.
It's kind of funny too that we pick VO2 max as a way to measure our peak athletes. I always want to add some other element in Floyd, like, okay, Michael Phelps has to swim across the pool 400 meters and deliver 15 live chickens at the end of that. Like, there has to be some other element so that's, you get on a bike and you're like,
that's a funny subject that I always laugh at. They talk about how he won so many medals, but like, the basketball team only has one game. They don't have another game that's 40 minutes long, another game that's 10 minutes long, and one with a 12-foot hoop. They could make 400 different basketball variations.
Yeah, what if they had
get all the medals?
What if they had donkey basketball?
That's actually worth putting in the Olympics.
Yes.
I think the Americans would crush that one. I don't think that's a big that's not a big game elsewhere.
Yeah, like if they took all the bicycling disciplines, and add, because I mean that's what swimming is, right? Like you've got different strokes and different combinations of strokes, and oh my gosh, it's just forever. And again, I love Michael Phelps. It's great.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to take a dig at him, but yeah, he's got it a little easier because he's got more medals available. That's for sure.
Well, listen, man, I don't have any other questions for you. I appreciate your time. I'll let John close out.
Well, I would like to point out that we have discussed, of course, your history in sports and in cycling. We've discussed American obsession with professional athletes. We've discussed athletes' place in society, the impact of the war on drugs, expanding the spectrum of Olympic events. We covered a lot of shit today. So, hey, for going on this ride with us and for allowing you kind of had no choice, but you did allow us to all peer into the world of professional sports in a way that nobody else had done until you came along. And I know you didn't choose it, but you did endure it. And for the human lessons there that we have yet to completely learn and realize, I just want to say thanks on behalf of sports fans.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So there he is, everybody. Floyd Landis. Go to floydsofleadville.com. Get plenty of CBD products to enhance your own performance. And thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.